Good morning, world. This is Steve Rao, live from the All America city of Morrisville on Pod TV's World Edition. And on World Edition, we talk about news around the world, innovation, technology, and continue our discussion of the COVID pandemic, its effect on politics, on the economy, what's going on in the nation of the United States and the world as we deal with this never ending pandemic, as I call it a hydra. Now we're dealing with the Omicron variant. Today, I don't really have many prepared remarks, but I just have some insight I want to share with each of you. I was recently reading an article in the New York Times about new treatments on the way by both Pfizer and Moderna for a COVID pill. The pill would be taken after a positive COVID test, and you would take it for 5 days. It would significantly reduce hospitalizations and would make eventually the potential would be to transform COVID 19 into more of a respiratory disease, more like the flu. Now, in Pfizer's research, it would reduce hospitalizations by 85%. And it would be psychologically easier for someone after they get a COVID test to take a pill at home rather than having to go to the hospital and get a vaccine or go to another, pharmacy and get a vaccine. I would feel a lot more comfortable if there was a COVID vaccine pill, but this is only for if you have the COVID pandemic. Now, the reason I bring this up, and it's something we haven't talked a lot about in the show, is the data does show that if you're 50 or younger, the chances of getting COVID or dying from COVID go down tremendously. And even along young kids, my niece just had COVID. She recovered after about 4 days and she's completely normal again. She was quarantined for 10, but after 4 days, her symptoms went away and she was okay. Now, why do I say that? Because we know that those that are dying from COVID are either elderly, over 65, they're suffering from medical conditions, or they're medically compromised, immunocompromised. And those are the ones that are dying and getting very, very sick. But it has all of the country and many of the world just so scared, so afraid. My final thought is this. I did hear Bill Maher on CNN a few weeks ago talk about something that we don't talk about a lot: the overall health of our nation. In other words, are the percentages of COVID cases more common among those with high cardiovascular disease, with high rates of liver disease or other diseases that they already have? Maybe they're obese and more prone to get in disease. And so, are those the people that are getting COVID? So, it's not so much just everybody in the nation is getting COVID. And that means that the healthier we are in a healthcare system, the less chances we are to get any virus or any pandemic. And it seems like we've gotten away from that in our conversation of dealing with the COVID. I would ask health providers and doctors to come and give us ideas of how we can be healthier, whether it's, obviously exercise, mental health, yoga, how we eat, our diet. All of those things are important to keep the human body, a machine, intact, so that even if we were in contact with someone with COVID, the chances of us of getting it would go down tremendously. And if we did get it, we probably would recover quicker. Anyway, this Delta variant, Omicron variant, has many people scared. We're going to continue our discussion about COVID today, talk a little bit about the infrastructure bill and other things going on in the world. I'm now going to bring in our guests, Mark Lee, my co host um, and member of the IBM Pod TV family, Shaquille Latimer from Down Under, and Sasha Starr, who I don't know if he's with us from Chess Stars.
Here.
Guys, I went sort of ad lib. I have a photographic memory, so I didn't do as much practice, but I think it went pretty well. The bottom line is there's this new COVID treatment, a pill. It's on its way. I get COVID. I'm positive. I test positive. I take a pill for 5 days, and then it would reduce my symptoms. And what do you all think about this? Is this a great innovation? And do you think it's hard from the pharmaceutical companies? Sasha, any thoughts?
Um, what are my thoughts? There is nothing much new happening. It's everything about holding the distance, wearing masks now, vaccines, boosters. It all remains the same. Um, the reluctance of people, a lot of people, to take the vaccine make them less effective, unfortunately, because regardless how much vaccines you take, the more people are there who are not using vaccines, it makes vulnerable not only them but also people who are taking vaccines. So unless you're in China, where it's mandatory to stay home or take vaccines or do something else, whatever they will decide people should do, and it's enforced 100%. US is a very different animal. There is
Well,
nobody can do that.
let me shift the focus then instead of talking about specific, vaccine treatments and things. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, isn't it true what Bill Maher said that the healthier we are, the less likely are we to get any sickness. Don't you feel, Shaquille, that we've gotten away from that a little bit
I
in
don't.
terms
I
of
don't have any comments to make about this. As I said, we've been censored by big tech. Okay, the message is loud and clear. I will continue to say that we should be entitled to freedom of speech, and it causes damage when people can't explore these ideas. However, we've been warned. We've been taken off YouTube. We've been demonetized, and our videos don't go out for discussing the issues of second generation vaccines. Are healthier people less likely to get it? Should we prioritize people that are more at risk? And
all
for
right.
no reason at all, we were taken off. So I don't have any comment to make at all.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and leave the show today because I don't have anything to talk about. So I just want to wish you all a good weekend, and I've got some other things I've got to do. So I actually prepared an
You can
exercise.
talk to the other
No,
panelists. I just don't want to be.
I've got to
Well,
go.
well, well, thanks, Steve. Okay, nothing to
No,
talk
I
about
just
today.
I don't
Hey,
really have another. I
hey,
really don't have a lot of other issues I was going to talk about today.
yeah.
So I
But I
think
mean, health, Steve, for one thing, health is something that a lot of people have said that we need to do better with in
yeah.
terms
But
of
I mean,
just our
if I
general
can't
health.
talk about health, then I'm just going to take this offline.
Yeah.
But
Well,
But Steve,
I'm just going to go ahead
Steve,
and hand
I'm
it
not
off to
stopping
Mark.
you. Hang on, Steve. I'm not stopping you from talking about it. I'm saying that I'm not going to make any comments about it
Well,
because
no, I don't want to host a show
the
where
other
people
the,
can't
the
make
other.
comments. So I
But
don't want to
hey,
host a show where people can't make comments. So
well, then take it out
it's
on
okay.
take it
It's
out on
okay. I'm
big
not
tech.
mad, guys. I don't want to make a scene.
Take it
I'm
out on
going to
big
go. I've
tech.
got some
Don't
other
take it
things I
out
got
on
to
me.
do.
I'm the one that doesn't want to participate in this part of the conversation because we've been warned, and so I'm not going to participate.
actually, I think it was YouTube who banned us for a week for discussing
Okay.
COVID-19.
Well, I think in the
Steve,
interest of the
I
show,
would like to ask you something.
it's probably better for me to just go ahead and leave, and I'll be back
Steve,
on Monday.
wait a sec
Okay.
before you leave. Yesterday, when you announced today's show, you said that today we will discuss immigration. All of a sudden, you started right from this way.
Okay,
How
I
is
can tell you
this?
this,
Why?
this on
I don't
COVID-19,
understand that.
Sasha. I know he left, but the thing is, so I post on LinkedIn a lot to figure out what is the hottest topic right now dealing with the economy, and I put in the budget. I put in several different polling things. By far, the one that got the most vote was COVID-19 and their effect on the economy. Now, this does create a problem that I agree with Shaquille about, because when we start discussing it, we get pulled off the air. At least we got pulled off the air on YouTube. In other words, they just shut us down for a week. I think, was it a week? We got our suspension, Mark.
It was about a week.
And it was YouTube that put us down. And YouTube is owned by Google. It's one of the big tech companies that, in their infinite wisdom, determine freedom of speech around the world. Now, notice what I said. It's not freedom of speech in the United States. Freedom of speech around the world, because Google is a worldwide enterprise that owns YouTube, which is a worldwide enterprise. Now, the beauty, and this is one reason I'm not so concerned, is we also now distribute through LinkedIn, Facebook, Google, Reddit, Twitter, and Twitch. Okay. And so we get shut down by one, but doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be shut down by all sources, at least at this point in time. It weird that it becomes a sensitive issue. And even when Steve was just talking about, well, people under 50 don't have, and by the way, he might be right, don't have huge mortality rates. Okay, at least what I've seen. Things like that, there's two groups. There's the anti-vaxxers and the pro-vaxxers. The pro-vaxxers may go, well, we don't want you to discuss that. Click. And they just put you off the air. I mean, that's the cold reality of the media industry today, is that they can, will, and they will shut you down. For
That's very
discussing
much true.
items.
And by the way, Sasha, I was the one that brought up the immigration issue and said that we would talk about that. And it did come up at least 3 times in 3 different cases, including the United States. So I would love to hear people's thoughts about immigration, because definitely the French elections are looming and the candidates are staking out tough positions on the migrants in that particular nation. And then in Austria, it looks like the immigration hardliner Karl Neiheimer has taken over as the leader of that particular country. And they are saying that immigration reform is critical to addressing the U.S. talent shortage. So that's part of the conversation I know was going on with France, because France was taking more of a hardline stance against the immigrants, whereas countries like Germany and I think others were trying to bring in more immigrants to deal with the supposed talent shortage that these countries have and all of that. So that's just a little bit of an overview of immigration from 3 different perspectives, and I can bring up some of the stories and what they specifically said. But I was the one that did bring up that we would talk about immigration today, and immigration does seem to be a worldwide issue. So I'd love to hear how immigration is treated in Canada and how it is treated in Australia. So like I said, we have 2 folks from those 2 countries. So I'd love to hear folks' thoughts about immigration in general, and particularly immigration in your respective countries. So Sasha, since I'm the one that brought it up and you brought it back up, I'll start with you, and then I would love to hear from, Shaquille as well.
Thank you. So now Shaquille has a little bit more time to prepare his reply.
They won't take him off the air because he talks about immigration in Australia.
You see,
Oh,
Canada.
by the way, I sent the beam over to Australia, so now they're watching you over in Australia, Shaquille. Sometimes I don't distribute to Australia, but this one is. Go
on. Okay, one has to have in mind that both Australia and Canada, but also is United States, surprisingly, they are immigrants country. They are built by immigrants for immigrants, and more immigrants will keep coming in these countries. In this, obviously, Canada is not unique in this role, and Canadian immigration process, many people are criticizing that in Canada, that too many people are coming from Asia or Latin America, for example, or some Central America, whatever it is. I was witness to one. I think we were flying back from holidays in Mexico, and the plane didn't leave on time. It stayed on a tarmac for 30 or 40 extra minutes. Why? Because there is a large group of Central American immigrants boarded the plane, and only then the plane flew. Obviously, there are people who didn't have proper immigration process. They didn't have immigration paper or so on, so they would be apprehended and going through immigration process right at the airport in Toronto. But okay, that's the reality. So I'm pretty sure that it's very lucrative business for immigration consultants, lawyers, and people who are involved in that process. So that's why it will keep doing. So I know quite a few paralegals who are doing nothing but immigration process. I know the doctors who are almost quit their practice and working only with...
You know, Mark, one of our lawyers on Lawyers Den, Guidry Stonsonite, is an immigration attorney in South Florida. Now, she received her master's in international law at Denver, but where do you make money? Immigration lawyer in Miami. So the thing is, if you want to discuss immigration, it's good to have a subject matter expert like her on. We can invite Guidry on, and she can discuss immigration. She works in that field all the time in the United States about immigrating to the United States. She's even trying to figure out how to get Shaquille in. But the immigration, there was a law passed in our Constitution. Shaquille Latmer is not allowed in the United States. And I think it got majority votes. So it's going to be a tough haul, but we're gonna see if we can get that constitutional amendment overturned. So Shaquille,
I can assure you, I have too many friends that are Democrats and too many friends that are Republicans for that to ever pass with any support at all.
By the way, I have the new presidential poll that just came out on LinkedIn that I did. I know we're going to ship. Let's do immigration first. Then I got to give you this presidential poll. You will fall out of your chair when you find out the answer. But let's hear from down under, mate, and find out about immigrating into the great outback.
Well, I mean, obviously, I've not immigrated to Australia. I was born here, so I don't know exactly what the what the immigration rules are like. But I'll say that, Canada is obviously fairly pro-immigrant, that they want people to come over and bring their resources. And there's some, pretty easy programs in Canada, like Prince Edward Island had a program where it was like 150 grand or something that you set up a business and you were in. So there's a number of different programs that the provinces all have their own options, and I think that's great. Australians going to Canada, if you're under 30, it's basically automatic that you get a working visa. I wish I'd known that, and I wish I'd have done that when I was younger. And it's pretty much automatic that you get a renewal, so you can be in Canada for 4 or 5 years. Australia has various programs as well, and obviously we have a reciprocal program with Canada, so Canadian youth can come over here. I don't think they take it up as much as they'd like. We also have a lot of obviously British and American people that travel here on working visas, and Europeans. Our worst offenders for overstaying visas are, of course, Americans. Our second worst offenders are the Brits. But look, I think that Australia, Canada, and most, even the United States, I think most of our countries are fairly open to having immigrants come over. But I think that what people get concerned about is when there is a mass concentration of immigrants that take over large sections of a particular area. So in Sydney, for example, a lot of Western Sydney has been taken over. I don't want to use the word taken over, but a lot of immigration to Western Sydney has been Middle Eastern immigration and Islamic immigration. And I think there's a feeling amongst a lot of Sydney-siders that there's a disconnect between traditional Australian values and the values that are being brought over by people that are immigrating. And I think that's probably the main thing that we need to do if we're going to have multicultural societies, is to make sure that people are able to respect each other's cultures, but also share their cultures with each other. And I think that that's a prevalent issue in Australia. What we've seen in Australia, really since I moved to Sydney when I was 11, we started seeing a lot of people that were being described in those days as sort of being racist, because they were becoming a little bit intolerant of some of the changes that people were trying to make. And an example of that was in Victoria, where the local council made a rule that women and girls were not allowed to swim at the council-owned swimming pools on certain days because it would offend the Muslim men who wanted to use those pools. And I sort of looked at that and said, look, if I want to take my wife or my daughter or, my mother to the pools that I'm paying for as a ratepayer of that council, I shouldn't be denied entry. I mean, we don't believe in discriminating against genders, against sexuality, against all these different things. So it seemed a little bit inconsistent. And I think that is why people often express a view in Australia, in Canada, in the United States, and elsewhere in Europe. The reason why they express a view that sounds anti-immigrant is not so much that they care about immigrants coming in. It's generally that they have a problem with people coming in and not amalgamate, not sort of merging into the community, not sharing the culture, that sort of stuff. And I've been through a lot of those European countries that people talk about as being really hostile to different nationalities. And I haven't experienced it. They generally say, oh, yeah, where you're from? Oh, you're visiting, whatever. And when I've said, oh, look, I'm actually going to be moving to Switzerland, or I'm moving to Austria, or I'm moving, wherever, they're welcoming in with open arms. So I don't think that it's a race issue. But I also would say that anybody who's going to immigrate to a country, if I'm going to immigrate to Canada, then I should be able to show the Canadians that, hey, I'm going to contribute something. I'm not going to be relying on public services. I'm going to contribute something. I'm going to be self-sufficient. I'm going to have a job or a business or whatever. I'm going to be positive for the community. If I'm a refugee, or if I'm somebody who's going to immigrate to Canada and I can't speak English or French, and I'm going to be temporarily, I'm going to be a burden on the taxpayer, it is my obligation to, over time, learn the language, learn the culture, create a new life for myself. It's not fair for me to live there for 10 years and just live on the taxpayer and not do anything and say, well, woe is me, I'm the victim. You shouldn't do that. I think that's why people get their back up about things.
Well, it's interesting you brought that up, because a couple of things that came to my mind and everything. One is apparently they're trying to update the H-1B visa guidelines, which haven't changed apparently for 14 years. And part of that is to get more high-tech people into the immigrant pool, because they're saying that that will help us with the shortage of STEM workers that we have, bringing them in from other countries where they've been trained and things of that nature. So they've definitely talked about bringing folks in that are highly trained, say from India, from some of the African nations, from some of the European nations as well. But I do know, as one that has had friends that have worked with some of those companies, be they folks from India or some of the other Asian companies, that is sometimes one of their complaints. And I wish Steve was here to address this issue that I'm going to bring up, because they sometimes feel that almost the opposite happens, that they don't always understand, because of the accents and everything, their employees or their people that are their immediate supervisors. So they sometimes feel that they wish that some of the folks from those other cultures would also reach back and try to have a better understanding of their American workers, for lack of a better term, and things of that nature.
I'll say that does happen over time generally. You know, people that have got a strong accent, their accent softens over time when they spend more time in a place. I know some Japanese people that have lived in Australia for 4 years, and you know, you, as an Australian, you can hear the Japanese sort of accent, but when they pronounce words in an Australian way. You know, totally different to how an American Japanese person would pronounce it. But I just want to say, look, I obviously my family has benefited enormously from, you know, immigration into Australia. My uncle came to Australia as a teenager. He was sponsored over, and then my mother came over, and then I was born here, and obviously I've got family connections to Britain. So look, I think that immigration's great, but you know, you have to be targeting the right areas, and it's not just about targeting poorer countries and taking the best from the poorer countries. I think that we should be targeting each other, right? So Australia should have a pretty aggressive, you know, immigration or work visa program to say to Americans, hey, you know, if you're a great person in the STEM section, come to Australia. We want to have you here. America should be saying, hey, if you're excellent in the UK, we want you here. And that's something that I think is a real problem, is that we're not expanding within Western countries. So the H-1B1 visa that you're talking about, for example, Australians have a special visa that isn't available to anybody else. It's called the E3. Mm-hmm. And there's 10,000 visas set aside for Australians every year. Only 1,500 of them are taken up, right? And America did try to increase that, but they weren't able to. So what ended up happening was that they allowed the overflow to go to Ireland. Mm-hmm. They're still not being taken up. So, you know, a lot of people who come from other Western countries don't need to come in on the H-1B1 stream and be sponsored by an employer. There's other entry avenues to come in, but they're just not attracting people from other wealthy Western countries. And I think that the shame of that is that we end up taking the very best from poorer countries and bringing them into our own, leaving the poorer country poorer because their talent is taken away from them. I think we need to focus on things. And the rare time that I'll say it, Mark, the US education system is obviously not producing the results that people want.
Right.
The idea that you would bring in people from another country as a preference to spending money on underprivileged communities and communities of color, it's very rare you'll hear me say it, right? I don't think that makes sense. If we know that there is, and I don't agree with the stats, but if we know that, you know, we have a real shortage of people of color in STEM subjects, it would make more sense in that environment to spend more money on programs to bring them into STEM, right, and to give them educational opportunities there in order to increase your workforce than to bring in immigrants from another country in order to meet that need.
Now, interestingly enough, we're discussing Australia, Canada, and US.
Nick's clapping and Mark's sitting there going, what the hell just happened? What did Shaquille just say? Sorry, Sasha.
Are you through?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. So we are talking about these three largely immigrants country. Now, let's talk about other countries, specifically in Europe. They're not immigrants countries. And some of them are going to extremes like Poland, who are saying Poland is for Poles. Now, what's happened if other countries like France, or Germany, UK to lesser extent, because UK is a quasi-immigrant country as well, as Australia and Canada and so on. But France, Germany in particular, never mind Spain, Italy, and many other countries. What if they will adopt Polish model that Italy is for Italians, Spain is for Spaniards, France is for French people. Now, what would happen, and why do you think they wouldn't or ought to not to do it?
Well, can I respond to that, Sato?
Yes, please.
So let me just say, if I was to move to Canada, or if I was to move to the United States, and immigrate, become naturalized, become a citizen, I could say, "Hey, I'm Canadian," or "Hey, I'm American," and nobody would really blink an eyelid. Like, okay, cool, yeah, that person's American, and you become American or you become Canadian. I think it'd be a lot more difficult for me to say, if I've moved to Italy and I've become Italian, it'd be a lot more difficult for me to say I'm Italian, right? That's a much harder thing for me to be able to say, and that's very similar to that across Europe. But in relation to what's happening in Poland and some of the more right-wing movements that you're beginning to see in Austria, in Germany, and in all those sorts of places, it's not because, if you actually go and talk to the people there, it's not because they're actually anti-immigrant. Most of the people weren't. What it was, like if you take, for example, Germany, when the German government starts putting ads on TV of German women coming home, their child has walked in the door. This is the advertisement. The child's walked in the door, and the woman's wearing the Muslim garb, and the 5-year-old's like, "What's happened? And why are you wearing that?" And she goes, "Well, we're Muslim now." Germans feel like they're attacked. They're like, "Hey, and look, if you go back to World War II, the reason why Hitler was able to originally get so popular was because he was talking to Germans about national pride, and Germans were made to feel like pariahs after the end of World War I. Nobody wants to feel like that in their country. So anybody who comes along and says, "Hey, let's be proud of who we are," is going to do that. So I think that's what you're seeing across Europe. You're seeing it in France as well. You're seeing it in Sweden, of all places. It's not so much they don't like immigrants. It's that they don't want people to come in and dramatically change the culture away from what it is. If you're going to move somewhere, move there because you like the place. Don't move there and then tell them that you hate the place.
But what you're describing is exactly the reason why they don't like immigrants, because they look different. They change fabrics of society. They're bringing foreign elements, whether it's a religion, language, race, just anything. So this is exactly why Poland says that the Poland is for Poles, because it's a very homogeneous country with same language, same religion, and they just don't want to change that fabrics. They don't want other elements there, not because they're inferior to Poles. No, they're just different. And
But why should they change? If you're not prepared to accept the culture, if you're not prepared to accept the culture of the place you're going to, why move there? Like when I go to the United States, Americans often say, "Well, you're a constitutional conservative. You're not from here. It's incredible that you know so much about our Constitution." I don't know so much about the Constitution because I'm in love with America. I know so much about the Constitution because I'm a real advocate of human rights and the United Nations a Declaration of Human Rights. That's a reason why I pay so much attention to what's happening in the US and the UK, etc. But when I get over there, I don't sit there and say, "Look, you know what you guys should do? You guys should become a communist country, or you guys should become some other country." I talk about the benefits and the greatness that is within the US system. So if I was going to move to China, for example, there's no point me moving to China and being an advocate for free market capitalism, because the Chinese people, not just the government by force, the Chinese people have rejected that idea, and you have to respect what the Chinese people want. So you don't move to China and then say, "Well, China, you're this repressive place, and I don't have the rights." Blah blah. No, you don't have the same rights and freedoms that you have in the West. And if you want them, then you don't move to China. I mean, it's you've got to be able to. You don't move to Saudi Arabia with your wife, and your wife gets upset that she can't wear a miniskirt. Don't move to Saudi Arabia. That's their culture. So I don't see any countries saying, "Hey, listen, like this is our culture, this is who we are, and if you don't like it, don't come here."
We take a quick commercial break, then we'll go back to the presidential poll. I think everybody will find it exciting what the presidential poll just showed on LinkedIn. Quick
to the presidential poll, just a couple of quick points that I was going to bring up really quickly. One is that you use France as an example and a place that could be like France the French only. And I think part of the issue with that would be that would be like almost a 360-degree turn, because France has always had this history of, particularly in the African American community, of having like this romance, and the romance goes both ways, because a lot of the artists from the Harlem Renaissance went there, including Josephine Baker and a number of others, partially to broaden their artistic vision, partially to get away from the oppression of the racism of the day and everything. But that has been going on for years. I don't know that many other world countries that have a particular street named after Malcolm X, but France does have one. I think it's in Paris, the Malcolm X Boulevard. So that's part of a romance that goes both ways. So I think people would be surprised because of the nature of France's relationship, particularly with the African American community, if they made a 360-degree turn into the other direction. And along the same lines, and then I'll let Nick get to his presidential poll and everything, is that the other thing that happens is that there are countries, because you mentioned, Shaquille, about countries reaching into America. And there are countries that have been doing that, because I know that Ghana, in its great return kind of policy, we're trying to get more people to come, particularly African Americans, to come back to that nation. I think Kenya has been making some efforts to try to get people to come back in. So there are African nations that are reaching over the pond to try to get people to come and buy land, because apparently the land is very cheap over there and everything. So there are people that are making those efforts, and in order to increase their base by reaching into America. Now, how many people are taking that? Your guess is
you're right. The land is cheap, but it will become even cheaper in the next 2 years. But beside the point, the France is a very special case. I'm glad you mentioned that. Don't forget that France was a colonial power, second to England. So that's why France has some legitimate cause to be immigrant country, because people from former colonies are, in most cases, are coming to France. But you see, don't forget that they are already exposed to French culture, language, and customs, and so on. So this is a different case. Now, when you have influx of these people from Iraq or Morocco or some other countries coming to Poland, what kind of exposure they ever had, if any, to Poland culture, religion, language? Just none, zero. So now I'm not. I'm not talking about Canada, Australia, possibly US, because they are immigrants country. So this is absolutely different case than speaking about European countries. And Germany was never colonial power. It's all land. We have access to.
I think they should send all the immigrants to Australia. I've been there. There's plenty of land.
Let me just say,
no one really cares about anything down there anyway.
Quickly, Sasha, I make a prediction that you're no longer welcome in France if you ever want to go for a holiday there, because you dared to say they were second to the UK when it comes to being a colonial power. So you're
Napoleon would turn over
you have to visit Paris or anything, you put them behind you. But look, I will say, I think it is important that you actually learn the languages of the places you're going to. Now, obviously, as English speakers, we have some advantages, because if I come to America, everyone generally understands what I'm saying. And the language differences are minor, so we all know what we're talking about. But when I was moving to Switzerland, although there was no need for me to learn German, there really wasn't, because pretty much everyone in Switzerland speaks English. I felt as though if I was going to spend time there, and the reason why I'd be moving there in the first place was because I had better opportunities there than I had in my home country, I would, and I suck at learning languages, it's my weak spot, but I would actually take the time to learn German, because I think it's important to learn the language of the country. The same thing with when I was looking at living in Monaco, and I've got a lot of friends in Monaco. One of the things that I would do is, if I lived in Monaco, there's no need for me to learn French, because they speak English there. Right. But it is, it's not really part of France, but it may as well be. And so, a lot of the people there are French. French is the national language of the place. And I think that if I'm going to spend any time there, living there, it's my obligation to actually learn French. So, again, if you move to a country, you kind of have to take on that country's culture. And this is the reason why there's so much animosity. Because if you have a look, it's not animosity against just all immigrants. It's immigrants that are coming over different religions, different languages, and refusing to learn the current, the languages in the country. Instead, they're saying, well, look, we had this in Australia with Asian people 20, 30 years ago. 50, 60 years ago, 100 years ago, it was about Italian and Greek people, where you'd walk down the street and all of a sudden the signs are written in the other language and you're struggling to actually find the English language. You go into a restaurant, you can't find the English menu. You see some hostility about that, places like LA and other parts of America where the signs are in Spanish and you can't find the thing written in English. This is the reason why, because people who are natively born in that country or have immigrated and learned the language that don't know the other language feel like they're being excluded from parts of their society because they can't speak a foreign language, which, why should they have to?
Yeah, well, Shaquille, if you come to the United States, ditch your Bentley, I'll give you a gun and a pickup truck, and then you'll be fitting in here quite well. Just remember, the gun, pickup truck, then you're an American. In the meantime,
I generally don't spend a lot of time in places where I need to carry a gun, but
welcome to the United States of America. But now we're going to the presidential poll. Mm-hmm. You're going to love this one. This was placed on LinkedIn. By the way, LinkedIn is guiding us as to what subject we're going to be discussing on Media Monday and Economics Monday. We know on Saturday we're going to be discussing on Chess Stars, which I hope you are, Sasha, the World Championship that's going on. Yeah.
Actually, there will be tremendous interest to tomorrow's program because it hasn't been announced yet that Nguyen is preparing it. There is I wouldn't even say conspiracy theory. I think it's a real theory. What's really happening with this World Championship match? I think Carlsen is motivated to stop all World Championship matches. The second question is why? Because there is
playing against computers.
There is former Iranian grandmasters now living in France. Mm-hmm. He's already French citizen. The way knows Firouzja. And Firouzja, he's first of all, he's extremely talented. Mm-hmm. He's much younger than Carlsen, and no later than in 2 years' time, if not sooner, he will not only challenge Carlsen, he'll beat the hell out of him.
Ooh.
Now, Carlsen, he wants to remain in history of the game as the last ever classical chess champion. He doesn't want to lose much. He will struggle, but with a little help from Nepomniachtchi. He will draw this match. Most likely there will be 14 draws. 5 already done. Today 6th one. Tomorrow will be a 7th one. So half match is over. Another half. I think these two guys are very practical. They're just separating sponsors with their money and will laugh all the way to the bank. They're playing 14 useless draws and pocketing 2 million euros, not even dollars. So they're very, very lucky guys, but that's going to be the end of it.
Yeah, well, it'd be very interesting because the Bet sisters, one of them asked a question, how does a knight move? They asked Magnus Carlsen that. And Haraku got, well, this is a serious match. You shouldn't ask questions like that. But, Haraku needs to get a grip. But anyway, let's go to the presidential polls because everybody will like this. This is on LinkedIn, and people that are listening on LinkedIn, we are now beaming in LinkedIn. You can actually vote on the presidential poll. But here's the results that we have so far. Let's go. And one of the people on the poll was a person everybody's familiar with on this panel, Donald J. Trump. Donald J. Trump actually received 27% of the vote, in spite of the fact a new book has just come out. I'll get to that later. Okay. The new book came out by David K. Johnson, who's on our show, The Big Cheat. Okay, and everybody can get this at the bookstores right now.
It's even worse than you think. Is what does it say at the bottom? It's even worse than you think.
Well, that's one of his other ones. It's worse.
That's one of his other ones. Okay.
At the back he has a quote from Donald Trump. Listen to this quote. Okay, this is what Donald says about David Johnson. I know the reporter is a weird dude who's been following me 25 years. Obviously, he hasn't done so well. He's been following me in a negative fashion for 25 years. Always a hit. And I'm president, so he hasn't done a very good job. Anyway, so he has a testimonial from Donald Trump, and I thought it was a pretty cool thing. But I
do want to say to our audience as well, obviously most of us are friends with David K. Johnson. Yeah. And people know that politically, David K. Johnson and I sit on slightly different sides of the aisle looking at things. Seriously. But what I will say is I actually asked David K. Johnson because I thought, former New York Times reporter, Pulitzer Prize winner, he's just biased. And I actually asked him on air, and I've spoken to him off air as well. He's actually been fascinated with Donald Trump, the Trump family, for 30 years.
40 years.
He's watched some of the court cases to do with these casinos and all sorts of other things. So David K. Johnson knows Donald Trump's positives and negatives quite well, and I think that's very insightful when you read his books. You don't have to necessarily agree or disagree with what David K. Johnson says, but it's definitely well worth the read.
Okay, well, Steve has rejoined us. We're going through the presidential poll that's on LinkedIn right now. There's thousands of people who actually gone to the polls. About 100 so voted. Trump received 27% of the vote. But here's what you're going to find interesting, Steve, in the vote. And the votes are guiding me on how we're going to do our programming, so it's pretty important. Someone else, 68%. In other words,
just anybody.
Anybody but Trump, 68%. But
we don't know what the question is yet.
Well, the question was. Let's see. I have the poll right here. The question was dealt with our next president. That was the question. Okay.
Okay. Hang on. What's the question? Who should it be? Who do you think?
It says our next president. It wasn't like who you should think. Our next president. Okay. 27% said Trump. 68% said someone else. But here's the number that will shock the conscience of America right now. Joe Biden received, the math majors would figure it out, 6%. Holy tomatoes.
What did he get?
Is that a surprise to anyone though?
It's a surprise
6%.
to me because 6% isn't even double digit, Shaquille. 6% is like this guy is like off the map for the next president.
Okay, but hold up a second, right? So, because the way the question is framed, it's just next president, the next president. It doesn't necessarily mean who do you want it to be. It might be who do you think it's going to be, right? Those numbers would make sense because I don't think that very many people, even if they're Biden fans, not very many people think that he's going to run again. Yeah. A lot of people think he's just going to be too old. He appears to be struggling at the moment. Yeah. So I don't think that, and there's going to be a lot. The Republicans are going to come out. They smell blood in the water. They're going to be coming out pushing. And one of the things the Republicans are doing as a strategy at the moment is they're trying to make out that people like AOC and the Squad and all those sorts of people, that they're sort of the hidden puppet masters. And so because AOC, for example, because she's so far on the progressive side, she doesn't appeal to the moderates, even with the Democrats. So it's very easy if you suggest that Biden is controlled by AOC, it's very easy to swing people against Biden. Biden's going to have an uphill battle here. He could win this, but he really needs to work on his messaging, and the Democrats need to work on their messaging. I wouldn't read too much into that. I don't think that, as I've said before, I don't think that Trump should run again because I don't think it's in the best interest of the Republicans. I don't think it's in the best interest of America. But I'm not surprised that 86% of people.
Guys, I'm glad I'm.
What does Kamala Harris have? Out of curiosity.
Yeah, was that the fourth option? Because they give you four options.
No, I didn't make four options. I just put in these three. But Shaquille brought up something also very interesting thing about LinkedIn polls. I actually had a poll on LinkedIn polls. What do you think about LinkedIn polls? And 70% of people in LinkedIn believed the LinkedIn polls were worthless. So the thing is, you have to take it with a grain of salt. You got to take it with a grain of salt. You got to take it as, okay, these are worthless polls. But the thing is, to me, it gives an indication of what people on LinkedIn are thinking. Okay, and like I said, we are broadcasting now live in LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. And
we have a new one that we may be adding very shortly because I've been working on a.
There's another distribution point.
We may be adding very shortly, maybe next week, because I tested it on one of our shows yesterday. But we may be adding Instagram because there's a way to get to Instagram as long as the show is an hour or something like that. Because they did increase the amount of
too
time.
long for Instagram. Our show's too long.
Hey guys,
let's get back.
They changed the rules.
Let's get back to back.
No, it's okay, guys. I just had to take a moment. I'm sorry, I'm back. I'm only a human being.
You're sorry you're back, or you're back?
We're back. We're back.
Okay,
we will be more sensitive in terms of talking about issues to protect our censorship. I want to thank Shaquille Latimer for bringing that up. I just had to get my thoughts together. I know you just had a discussion on immigration. I think that my thoughts are, we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the world, and I'll close out with some thoughts. But I think that, first of all, we've just got. I do believe that the next few presidents, you might just have a lot of one-term presidents because I think the country is in just such a quagmire. We're in the middle of this pandemic. We've got a nation that is divided in sort of how we handle that. We have a foreign policy that's been brought into question. We've got China, the rising superpower. Don't know how we're going to deal with China. And we've got the potential of inflation, rising gas prices. Uh, I don't know, what a president's going to do in terms of, but I do think Shaquille had a good point. I think this president has to get back on message. I think he needs to really take a look at who he's got in the White House around him and maybe do a reshuffling. But I don't think the team he has in there right now is working for him. Starting with foreign policy, Blinken, Jake Sullivan, national security advisors. He made a good appointment with getting Powell back in there. And let's see what the Fed does now as we deal with, supply chain shortages, worker shortages. I got to be honest with you, I didn't really work for 2 months, but I was getting a check and it was really nice. And I kept wanting to do that. And my boss says, no, you've got to work now, but the point is free money. People eventually, if I'm sitting at home and I'm getting a check, why do I want to go back and work?
They call that
free money. I mean, but it's not free money because somebody has to pay for it, and that somebody probably won't be you. It's going to be your grandchildren that are going to have to pay that off. One of the other things on the international side that we have to worry about, Vladimir Putin has recently said that if NATO wants to interfere with what Russia's doing in the Ukraine, watch out because we'll start. I think he said we'll point our hypersonic weaponry at Western countries. So there's a real potential for there to be, and we haven't had one for a long time. So there's a real potential for there to be some significant international conflict. It's one thing for the United States to go into a country like Afghanistan. It's a whole different thing if the United States wants to really have a battle with Russia or China. Those sorts of countries, they can hold their own. And I think that we're walking into perilous times. We need to sort of calm down, reset, bring back diplomatic negotiations, all that sort of stuff. Because if not, we're headed in a poor direction, I think, for the future of our humanity.
Hey,
You're absolutely right. Not to think about some Ukraine. I'll tell you the background. The huge amount of forces are built on both sides, on the Russian border, from Russian side, and Ukrainian border on Ukrainian side. The count on each side exceeds 120,000 troops with all the weaponry and so on. And it seems to me, and I've listened to many other commentators who are close to this region, that the war is unavoidable. It's just there. They're playing a game who first will blink and open the fire, and the war will ignite immediately there. Now, what the United States is to do about it, I think it should stay away because it's not. When last time U.S. won the war? It was Grenada in 1984. That was a very successful war. The U.S. did extremely well, but besides Grenada, I don't recall any war that U.S. could win. So U.S. definitely has to stay out of it. Even Second World War, okay, U.S. won Second World War in Europe. If it wouldn't be Russia and others, and it would be one-on-one with Germany, it would get its nose blooded big time.
Well, that's an interesting thing that you say, though, Sasha. It's an interesting thing that you say that. I know, obviously cognizant that you are from what is now the Ukraine, but at the time that you were living there, it was still the USSR.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting dynamic because I would imagine, I'm not an expert in the area, but I would imagine that if the Ukraine didn't have the assistance of any other nation, Russia would crush the Ukraine because Russia's just such a big country. They have so much weapons. I mean, what could the Ukraine do? With NATO, originally NATO being there to restrain Soviet power, does NATO have an obligation, and do the countries that are part of NATO have an obligation to protect the Ukraine? And you might say, well, America should stay out of it. But legally, under international law and under the agreement that NATO has, is the United States and other countries like the UK, Germany, etc., are they really required to provide?
Wait. Ukraine is not part of NATO. There is no requirement of any NATO country, including US, to fight there. Ukraine is not NATO country.
No, I know that the Ukraine's not a NATO member, but what
Right.
I'm saying is the NATO membership. If the whole point of NATO was to restrain the Soviet power. Now, obviously, the USSR doesn't exist anymore, but and of course, like Crimea, for example, when the Russians went in there a few years ago, that was in breach of a previous agreement between Russia and the United States. So, does it look like weakness from both NATO and from the United States if they don't do anything about it? And that would be my fear. It's not so much about what is politically the best option for the Ukraine. It's about what politically makes sense for the countries in NATO and whether or not they feel as though they're going to be made to look weak in the face of their arch enemy, Vladimir Putin and Russia. The same thing, same sort of scenario with Taiwan. Does the West not interfere with Taiwan? And does that then make them look weak, with their arch enemy, President Xi and China? I think that the presidents and the decision makers in government and the military strategists, they look at that. I don't think they look about what's in the best interest of the actual region themselves.
I think Ukraine is in such a complete calamity, economically including, and there is no clear way out of it except the war. So that's why now Putin, on the other hand, he also wants a war, because for Putin it's a last chance to become a builder of second USSR. And if he will invade and succeed in Ukraine and subdue it and make it part of Russia, so Belarus coming next, almost like next day, and then slowly the former glory of USSR could be created. And that's Putin's last chance to do it. So both sides are very motivated to have a war. The question.
I'd like to ask you a question, Sasha. I'd like to ask you a question on this. So when I saw the footage of the Russian army coming into the Crimea, the Ukrainian army sort of just stood by, and a lot of people in Crimea were sort of welcoming them in. Yeah, please come in. They were celebrating.
They were waiting for orders, and they never got them.
What's your opinion of many of the former Soviet countries? Do the people in those Soviet countries, would they like to be part of Russia again, or do they like the independence that they have? What's your feeling about?
I have a mixed feeling. I think that the people wouldn't mind to become again citizens of whether Russia or Soviet Union too. But the leadership of all those countries definitely want to be independent, because this way they are much more substantial rulers and hegemons, and they can obviously personally gain much more than being just part of a larger country, whether it's Soviet Union or Russia. So I have a mixed feeling about this.
I hear you. Hey, before we end this show and everything and the discussion and everything, I was actually going to bring up an issue, and actually I think this might be the day that we shock each other. So Shaquille shocked me earlier. I might decide to shock Shaquille this time, because I know that one of the things that comes up in political campaigns, and I know Steve mentioned this earlier, is this whole notion of law and order candidates. So I'm actually thinking that because of what's going on in our retail industry, that we might need some stronger police presence, because apparently there is a lot of robberies that are taking place, and they are very brazen robberies, and they are going throughout the country of the United States. They're like these flash mobs that are popping up in Northern California. There's been some in Minnesota, and they have definitely stolen a lot of goods and everything, and they're actually encouraging, which Nick may be interested to know, their employers not to videotape the crimes, because that can just escalate the situation as well. So I'm thinking that a lot of our retail stores, and I had heard about this, I think, during the Thanksgiving break, but partially because of what happened at South Point, but just general conversations, that there are a lot of folks in that kind of gang mentality that are seeing this as an opportunity, because the stores are weakened because of the pandemic, and therefore they are being very brazen and very bold in the way that they are just kind of like.
In places like California, where they say if you steal less than $950, we're not even going to prosecute you.
I heard there's a new law being passed called the Kyle Rittenhouse Full Employment Act.
I think also, Mark, that what you'll probably want to say is that if if you want law and order to come under control, the law and order candidate is not going to come from the Republicans. You're going to need to see a law and order candidate
Yes.
come from the Democrats, like Bill Clinton did.
Right.
I think if you want to see real advancements in women's rights and transgender rights and people of color rights, etc., you're going to need to see a candidate that stands from the Republicans. Because what you have at the moment is you have Democrats standing for those issues, but that doesn't mean that anyone else is going to vote for them, because the people that are in the independent aren't necessarily going to vote for them because the Democrats are already doing it. So what you really need is you need somebody from the other side to advocate for that issue. So where Democrats are weak on law and order, for them to appeal to the middle, they need to be strong on law and order, which goes against what they currently stand for. Because what happens is all the Democrats will continue to vote for that candidate, and then you'll get some more support from the others. That's what happened with Bill Clinton. The same thing as I said in reverse. I personally think that you're likely to see a Republican woman become the first elected in her own right president. I don't think you'll see it from the Democrats. Again, the same reason, because Democrats are more likely to vote for a Republican.
It's a great idea. Yeah,
you're breaking up a little bit, Steve. You've got the
guys,
floor.
we're about to close out. My Wi-Fi's. Can you hear me?
We hear you.
Sorry, I apologize. Well, real quickly, the things we didn't talk about, but we'll talk about next week. We have, before I close out, the Congress has passed a bill to keep the government open until February, so no shutdown. Mexico has returned back to a Trump policy of having migrants wait at the border. We've heard about what's going on with different things, and this is an interesting discussion about autonomy, China, how they're doing. We'll talk about immigration next week in terms of the different components of immigration reform. I'm working to get Jeremy Robbins from the New American Economy to talk about the efforts he and I have been working on from immigration reform, skilled immigration, how do we address illegal immigration, and is it ever viable that a comprehensive immigration bill will be get to the Congress and be passed and signed by a president? I think many of us are skeptical at this point. My closing message is one of positivity. Yesterday, I watched the famous Broadway musical, Annie, and it was amazing to watch. I wish I could sing. I'll give it a try. The sun will come out tomorrow. Bet your bottom dollar that tomorrow there'll be sun. And I got emotional watching a very nostalgic, seeing President Roosevelt sitting with Eleanor Roosevelt. Maybe it was Francis Perkins and Harold Ickes, and he kept looking for the word before they jumped into the song. And he goes, I want to make it a new plan. I want to make it a new something. And then I think it was the first lady. She says, Franklin, a new deal. And then they sang this wonderful song about thinking about tomorrow. And it made me think we need to think more about tomorrow. We get so busy in politics and government beating each other up, so worried about who is in and who is out, who is up and who is down, what is in, what can we say, what can we not say, that we're not bringing ourselves together as a nation to say what we can do tomorrow. I do believe, I'm an optimist. I think the sun can come out tomorrow, but it's not going to come up. We're never going to get out of this cloud of darkness and negativity and partisanship. We cannot be positive if we live like that. So hopefully on this show, we give you an example. We have our moments every now and then where we respect each other's opinions. We have healthy debate, and we hope that our leaders will do that. So Franklin Roosevelt, we know that you're watching over us in heaven, and hopefully you were an optimist that gave us a new deal that created lots of jobs, got America moving again. Yes, there is disagreement today about how large those social welfare programs can run, but I'd rather have a president in the Oval Office that's positive, that didn't give up on America, and we shouldn't give up on ourselves. That's my closing message. The sun will come out tomorrow. And I don't know whether I'm getting more emotional in my old age, but right before I went to bed, I saw that little Annie, wonderful actress. A tear rolled down my cheek. Don't tell me Annie can still make me cry. That's my closing message. I will be back next Monday for another edition. Thank you all so much, and we'll be back.